Marcus Thorne stood in the empty kitchen of his new ranch, staring at the blood stain on the wooden floor that wouldn't scrub away. His hands were raw from trying. His knees ached from kneeling, but the dark mark remained like a permanent scar on the pale wood. $7. That's all he'd paid for this entire property at the government auction 3 hours ago. Now he understood why nobody else had bid. Before we continue, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The auction had been strange from the start. Marcus arrived at the county courthouse expecting competition for such a large property, but the room was nearly empty. Just him, an elderly man who kept shaking his head, and a woman in black who left before bidding started. When the auctioneer announced $7, Marcus thought it was a joke. Going once, going twice, the auctioneer said. Sold to the young man for $7. The nervous clerk handed him the deed with shaking fingers. You sure about this, son? The Morrison Ranch has been empty for 15 years. There's stories about that place. Marcus had laughed then. Stories didn't scare a man who'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes where the real monsters were the people supposed to protect you. Besides, he needed a fresh start somewhere nobody knew his name or his past. A ranch for $7 seemed like destiny calling. The drive took 30 minutes on roads that got narrower with each mile. When he finally saw the ranch house rising from the prairie grass like a ship in an ocean of green, his chest tightened with something that might have been hope. The house was bigger than expected. 2 stories of white wood siding faded to the color of old bones, with a wraparound porch that sagged but still looked sturdy. The windows were boarded up with plywood, and morning glory vines had claimed the eastern wall, their purple flowers the only splash of color. Marcus parked his Honda and sat for a moment. The silence out here was different from city quiet. It was huge and alive, filled with wind through grass and the distant cry of a hawk. For the first time in months, he could breathe without his chest feeling tight. The front door was unlocked, which should have been his first warning. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, and the air smelled like old wood and something else. Something sweet and sad that reminded him of flowers left too long in water. The living room was empty except for a stone fireplace and built-in shelves. His footsteps echoed as he walked through the house, checking each room. Empty bedrooms upstairs with peeling wallpaper. A bathroom with a surprisingly clean clawfoot tub. A study with more shelves and a window overlooking the barn. It was in the kitchen where he found the stain. A dark patch near the sink, roughly the size of a person lying down. He tried to convince himself it was water damage, but water damage didn't have that particular rusty brown color. That's when he heard the footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps moving across the floor directly above the kitchen. Marcus froze, his heart hammering. The house had been empty when he'd checked. Every room, every closet, every corner. He was sure of it. The footsteps stopped, then started again, moving toward the staircase. Marcus grabbed a wooden spoon from the counter and crept toward the hallway. The old house suddenly felt different around him, like it was holding its breath. The footsteps reached the stairs and began descending, one slow step at a time. Marcus pressed himself against the kitchen doorframe and listened to his own breathing, loud and quick in the afternoon quiet. That's when Marcus realized the most terrifying thing of all. The footsteps weren't wearing shoes. They were bare feet on wooden stairs, soft and careful, like someone who knew exactly which boards would creak and was avoiding them. Like someone who had walked these stairs 1,000 times before and knew every secret the old house kept. The bare feet stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Marcus held his breath, wooden spoon clutched in his sweaty palm. The afternoon sun streaming through the gaps in the boarded windows suddenly felt cold, and the sweet flower smell in the air grew stronger, almost overwhelming. Then she appeared in the doorway, and every rational thought in Marcus's head scattered like leaves in a windstorm. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, but beautiful in a way that made his chest ache with longing and fear. Her hair was long and dark, falling in waves past her shoulders, and her skin was pale as fresh cream. She wore a simple white dress that looked like it belonged in an old photograph, with small buttons down the front and sleeves that ended just past her wrists. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and deep and full of sadness that seemed older than her face. She couldn't have been more than 20, but when she looked at him, Marcus felt like she was seeing straight through to his soul. "You bought my home," she said, and her voice was soft as whispered prayers. There was no accusation in her tone, just a quiet statement of fact that somehow made Marcus feel like he'd stolen something precious. "I bought it at auction," he managed to say, lowering the wooden spoon. "I didn't know anyone was living here. The clerk said it had been empty for 15 years. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those storm-gray eyes. "Empty of the living, perhaps, but never empty of me." She took a step into the kitchen, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. "I am Valera. I have been waiting for someone like you." Marcus's mouth went dry. Up close, he could see that her white dress was old-fashioned, with tiny pearl buttons and lace at the collar that looked hand-sewn. Her skin had an almost translucent quality, like porcelain held up to candlelight. "Someone like me?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Valera moved to the kitchen window and placed her palm against the boarded wood, as if she could see through it to the prairie beyond. "Someone who understands what it means to have nowhere else to go. Someone who knows the ache of being unwanted." She turned back to him, and there was something in her expression that made his heart skip. "You grew up without parents who loved you, didn't you?" The question hit him like a physical blow. How could she possibly know that? He'd never told anyone in this town about his childhood, about the foster homes, and the feeling of never belonging anywhere. "I can see it in your eyes," she said gently. "The same hunger I carry, the need for a place to call home." She moved closer, and Marcus caught the scent that had been lingering in the house. Not flowers after all, but something deeper, like rain on summer grass and vanilla, and something indefinably sad. "This ranch has been my home for longer than you might believe, but it has been so terribly lonely." Marcus set the wooden spoon on the counter with trembling fingers. Nothing about this made sense. The girl was clearly real, solid and warm and breathing in front of him. But the house had been abandoned for 15 years. "Where have you been living?" he asked. "I checked every room when I got here." The house was empty. A smile touched the corners of Valara's mouth, but it was the saddest smile Marcus had ever seen. "There are places in this house that don't show themselves to everyone. Spaces between spaces where someone like me can exist without being seen. But now that you're here, now that someone owns this place who might understand." She reached out as if to touch his hand, then stopped herself, fingers hovering just inches from his skin. "I can be more myself again." The late afternoon sun was beginning to slant lower, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently. Marcus rubbed his eyes, wondering if stress was making him hallucinate. But when he looked again, Valera was still there, watching him with those deep gray eyes. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "If your family left, why didn't you go with them?" Something flickered across Valera's face, pain so sharp and sudden that Marcus instinctively took a step toward her. "My family didn't leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were taken, and I was left behind to wait for someone who might help me understand why." The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, and the sweet, sad smell in the air seemed to pulse with each beat. "Taken by who?" But Valera was already backing toward the doorway, shaking her head. "Not yet. You're not ready to hear that story yet. First, you need to decide if you're going to stay." She paused in the doorway. "There are other bedrooms upstairs. The blue room at the end of the hall has the most comfortable bed, and it gets the morning sun." "Wait," Marcus called out, but she was already gone, disappeared up the stairs as silently as she had come down them. He rushed to the staircase and looked up, but the second floor was empty and quiet. No sign that anyone had just been there except for the faintest trace of that sweet, sad scent lingering in the air. Marcus woke to the sound of piano music drifting through the walls like smoke. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a waltz that seemed to carry all the loneliness in the world within its notes. He sat up in the iron bed, his heart racing as he tried to orient himself in the unfamiliar darkness. The blue room was bathed in silver moonlight, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was or why his chest felt tight with inexplicable sadness. Then it all came rushing back. The $7 ranch, the bloodstain in the kitchen, Valera with her storm-gray eyes and her white dress that belonged to another century. He'd fallen asleep, still wearing his clothes, too exhausted to do more than collapse onto the surprisingly comfortable mattress. Now the piano music was calling to him like a siren's song. Marcus slipped his feet into his shoes and crept toward the bedroom door. The hallway was darker than dark, a blackness so complete it seemed to have weight. But the music was clearer now, coming from somewhere below. Not the kitchen or living room, but somewhere deeper in the house that he hadn't discovered yet. The stairs creaked under his feet as he descended. The music never stopped, as if whoever was playing had been practicing this same piece for years until their fingers knew every note by heart. As Marcus reached the bottom of the stairs, he realized the sound was coming from behind a door he'd missed during his earlier exploration. A door tucked beneath the staircase, painted the same white as the walls so it blended into the shadows. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob. The metal was ice-cold against his palm, so cold it almost burned. The door opened silently, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into what must have been a basement. The piano music was louder now, echoing up from below along with the warm glow of candlelight. Marcus descended the basement stairs one careful step at a time. The air grew warmer as he went deeper, and that sweet, sad scent became stronger. Not just vanilla and rain on grass, but something else now. Old books and beeswax candles, and the faint metallic tang of something he didn't want to identify. The basement opened into a room that took his breath away. It was larger than the entire first floor of the house, with stone walls that looked like they'd been carved from the earth itself. Dozens of candles and brass holders cast dancing shadows that made the whole space feel alive. And in the center of the room sat a grand piano, its black surface gleaming like still water in the candlelight. Valera sat at the piano bench, her white dress spread around her like flower petals, her long dark hair falling like a curtain as she bent over the keys. Her fingers moved with impossible grace, drawing music from the instrument that was so beautiful it made Marcus's eyes burn with unshed tears. She played like she was pouring her entire soul into each note. The walls around the piano were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, in frames of every size and style. Marcus stepped closer and felt his blood turn to ice water. Every single photograph showed the same scene. The Morrison Ranch, but not as he'd seen it today. These pictures showed the ranch in its prime, with white painted fences and horses grazing in green fields, and a family standing proudly in front of the house. The Morrison family, a tall man with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. A woman with dark hair and a smile that could light up a room. And 3 children. 2 boys with their father's strong jaw and their mother's gentle eyes. And a girl who looked exactly like Valera, down to the storm-gray eyes and the sad smile. But it was the dates written in careful script at the bottom of each photograph that made Marcus's knees go weak. 1952, 1955, 1963, 1971. The most recent was dated 1978, just months before the family disappeared. In that final photograph, the girl who looked like Valera was standing apart from the rest of the family, her white dress identical to the one she wore now. The piano music stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Valera turned on the bench to face him, and in the candlelight her skin looked almost transparent. "You found my sanctuary," she said, her voice soft as silk in the stone room. "I wasn't sure you would. Not everyone can see the door beneath the stairs." Marcus's mouth was dry as sand. "Those photographs, that's you, isn't it? But they go back decades. How is that possible?" Valera rose from the piano bench and moved toward the wall of photographs. "Time moves differently for some of us," she said, reaching out to touch the glass of the most recent photograph. "When you're caught between worlds, the years become fluid things. My family didn't just disappear, Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that had begun to slip down her cheeks. They were murdered. All of them. My parents, my brothers. Shot dead in their sleep by men who came in the night looking for something my father had hidden. The stone room suddenly felt smaller, the candle flames flickering more wildly. Marcus wanted to reach out and comfort her, but something held him back. What were they looking for? He asked. Gold, Valera said simply. My father had discovered a vein of gold running beneath the ranch. But someone found out. Someone who decided it would be easier to take the gold than to share it. She moved to another wall where Marcus now noticed mining tools hung like museum pieces. Pickaxes and shovels and coils of rope, all showing signs of recent use despite the decades that had supposedly passed. They killed everyone but me, Valera continued. I hid in this room while they searched the house above. I heard my mother scream. I heard my father beg for his children's lives. I heard the gunshots that ended everything I had ever loved. The candles flickered again, and Marcus could have sworn he heard footsteps moving across the floor above their heads. Slow, heavy boots that sounded nothing like Valera's bare feet. The footsteps on the floor above grew louder, more insistent, and Marcus realized with growing horror that whatever was happening in this house, he was now part of it. The $7 ranch had come with a price far higher than money. They're still here, aren't they? Marcus whispered. The men who killed your family. They're still looking for the gold. Valera nodded, fresh tears streaming down her pale cheeks. They never found it, you see. My father hid it too well. And now they're trapped here just as surely as I am, doomed to search for treasure they will never find. She looked up at Marcus with those storm-gray eyes, and he saw something in them that made his blood run cold. Not just sadness now, but hunger. Desperate, consuming hunger. But now you're here, she whispered. Someone who might be strong enough to help me end this. Marcus examined the mining tools on the wall. The pickaxes looked well maintained, as if someone had been using them recently. The coils of rope were free of dust, and there were lanterns that still smelled of oil. Where is it? He asked. Where did your father hide the gold? Valera moved to a section of the wall where the stones looked different from the rest. Newer somehow despite their obvious age. My father built this room as more than just a basement. It was meant to be a sanctuary. She pressed her palm against one of the stones, and with a grinding sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself, a section of the wall swung inward like a door. Beyond was a tunnel that stretched into darkness, its walls carved from solid rock and reinforced with wooden beams that gleamed with moisture in the candlelight. The air that flowed from the opening was cool and damp, carrying the scent of deep earth and something metallic. The mine, Valera said, stepping toward the opening. This is where my father found the gold that cost my family their lives. Marcus hesitated at the threshold. Everything rational in his mind was screaming at him to run. But there was something about Valera, something about the pain in her storm-gray eyes, that made running impossible. How do you know I'm seeking answers? He asked. She turned back to him, and in the flickering light her face looked ancient despite its youthful features. Because you bought this place for $7 without asking why it was so cheap. Because you came here alone with nothing but a broken heart. You're looking for something you lost long ago. What am I looking for? Home, Valera said simply. The feeling of belonging somewhere, of being wanted and needed and loved unconditionally. She held out her hand to him. I can give you that, Marcus. But first, you have to help me finish what my father started. Marcus took her hand, and this time her fingers felt warmer, more solid. Together, they entered the tunnel, leaving the candlelit basement behind for the deeper darkness of the mine. The tunnel sloped gently downward, and their footsteps echoed off the stone walls in a rhythm that sounded almost like a heartbeat. Valera seemed to know the way by instinct, guiding him through turns and forks in the passage. The air grew cooler as they descended, and Marcus could hear the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. My father worked down here every night after the ranch work was done, Valera said as they walked. He'd come down with his pickaxe and his lantern, chipping away at the rock grain by grain. He said the gold was calling to him, that he could feel it singing in the stone. They emerged into a larger chamber, and Marcus gasped at what he saw. The walls here were streaked with veins of something that glittered in the faint light. Not just yellow gold, but silver and copper too, creating a pattern that looked like lightning frozen in stone. And scattered throughout the chamber were piles of rocks that had been carefully sorted and stacked, along with tools and equipment that looked like they'd been used recently. He found more than he ever dreamed. Valera continued, moving to one of the rock piles and picking up a stone that gleamed with embedded gold. Enough to make our family wealthy beyond imagination. Enough to change our lives forever. Her voice grew bitter. Enough to make us targets for men who preferred murder to honest work. Marcus picked up one of the stones and held it up to examine the gold veining through its surface. Even with his limited knowledge, he could see that this was a substantial find. How did they find out? He asked. My father made the mistake of trusting the wrong person, Valera said. He needed help getting the gold appraised and processed, so he contacted a man in town who claimed to be a mining expert. Benjamin Graves was his name. The name sent a chill down Marcus's spine, though he couldn't say why. Something about it felt familiar, important. But even as they stood in the glittering chamber, Marcus heard something that made his blood turn cold. Footsteps in the tunnel behind them. Not the heavy boots from upstairs, but something else. Something that sounded like bare feet moving with predatory stealth through the stone passages. We're not alone down here, he whispered. Valera's face went pale as moonlight. Impossible. Nothing else can enter this place. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied now by whispering. Voices speaking in words he couldn't understand, but which carried a malevolence that needed no translation. We have to get out of here, Marcus said, grabbing Valera's hand and pulling her toward the tunnel that led back to the basement. But as they reached the chamber entrance, the whispering voices grew louder, and Marcus realized with growing horror that they weren't coming from behind them anymore. They were coming from ahead, from the tunnel they needed to use to escape. In the distance, Marcus could see lights moving through the tunnel. Not the warm yellow glow of candles, but a cold blue radiance that seemed to leach the warmth from the air itself. The gold, one of the voices said, clear as a bell in the stone chamber. Finally, after all these years, the gold will be ours. Marcus realized that whatever supernatural force had been keeping this place protected was weakening. The men who had murdered Valera's family were finally strong enough to enter the sanctuary that had sheltered her for decades. There's another way out, Valera said suddenly, pulling him toward the far wall of the chamber. My father built an escape tunnel. It leads to the barn. The escape tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, carved roughly through solid rock with tools that had left chisel marks still visible in the stone walls. Marcus had to crouch as he followed Valera through the narrow passage, his shoulders scraping against the rough surface with every step. Behind them, the cold blue lights had entered the main chamber, and he could hear voices echoing with increasing excitement. Here, one of the supernatural killers was saying, his voice carrying the wet sound of something that should have been buried long ago. The gold is here, just as we always knew it would be. Valera moved through the tunnel with desperate speed, her white dress catching on the rough stone but never tearing. In the absolute darkness, Marcus had to keep one hand on her shoulder to avoid losing her entirely. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the earth like a serpent fleeing toward some distant refuge. How far to the barn? Marcus whispered, trying not to think about the tons of rock above their heads. Not much farther, Valera replied, but there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. A strain, as if speaking was becoming difficult. My father dug this passage over 2 years, working in secret whenever he could slip away from the main mine. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Marcus felt a flutter of hope. But that hope died when he heard new sounds echoing through the passage behind them. Not just voices anymore, but something else. Something that sounded like digging. Like pickaxes and shovels biting into stone with inhuman speed. They're expanding the tunnel, Valera said, her voice barely a whisper now, making it wide enough for all of them to follow us. Marcus could picture it in his mind's eye. The twisted shapes he'd glimpsed in the cold blue light, no longer bound by human limitations, tearing through solid rock with supernatural fury. They had waited decades for this moment. The tunnel suddenly opened into a wider space, and Marcus could smell hay and old wood and the lingering scent of horses that had been gone for years. They were beneath the barn, in what must have been a root cellar that connected to the main building above. Wooden stairs led upward to a trap door in the ceiling, and pale moonlight filtered down through gaps in the barn walls. But as they climbed toward the surface, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Valera was becoming translucent again, her solid form flickering like a candle flame in the wind. The farther they moved from the main house and the basement sanctuary, the less real she became. "Valera," he said, reaching out to steady her as she stumbled on the wooden steps. His hand passed partially through her shoulder, feeling resistance like trying to grasp mist. "What's happening to you?" She turned to look at him, and her storm gray eyes were filled with panic. "I can't leave the ranch," she said, her voice so faint he had to strain to hear it. "I'm bound to this place, tied to the land where my family died. The farther I get from the house, the less I exist." They reached the top of the stairs and Marcus pushed open the trap door, revealing the interior of the old barn. Moonlight streamed through broken boards and missing shingles, illuminating empty horse stalls and farm equipment covered in decades of dust. But when Marcus turned back to help Valera climb out of the cellar, she was barely visible, little more than a shimmer in the air. "I can't come with you," she whispered, her form flickering in and out of visibility. "But you have to keep going. You have to get away from here and find help." "I'm not leaving you," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure how he could help someone who was rapidly becoming a ghost. "You have to," Valera insisted, her voice growing fainter with each word. "Benjamin Graves is still alive, still in town. He's the only one who knows the truth about what happened here. Find him. Make him confess." Below them, the sounds of supernatural digging were getting closer. The pickaxes and shovels were tearing through the tunnel with impossible speed, and Marcus could see that cold blue light beginning to seep up through the trap door opening. "How will I find you again?" he asked desperately. Valera's form solidified just enough for her to reach out and touch his face with fingers that felt like cool silk. "I'll always be here, waiting in the house where my family died. But Marcus, you have to promise me something. When you come back, you have to be strong enough to do what needs to be done." "What do you mean?" But she was already fading again, becoming nothing more than a whisper of white dress and sad gray eyes in the moonlit barn. "The gold isn't just metal, Marcus. It's been soaked in blood and anger for so long that it's become something else. Something that feeds on death. To stop this, to free me and put my family to rest, you might have to destroy the very thing they all died for." The cold blue light was pouring up through the trap door now, and Marcus could hear footsteps on the wooden stairs below. Not human footsteps, but something else. Something that scraped and clicked against the wood like claws. "Go," Valera whispered, her voice barely a breath of wind in the darkness. "Find Graves. Learn the truth. Come back when you're ready to face the darkness." Marcus ran. He burst through the barn door and sprinted across the moonlit prairie toward where he'd parked his Honda near the ranch house. Behind him, he could hear the supernatural killers emerging from the barn, their voices rising in frustration and rage as they realized their quarry had escaped. The engine finally caught, and Marcus gunned the Honda down the dirt road that led back to town. As he drove through the darkness, he could see the ranch growing smaller in his mirrors, but the cold blue glow seemed to follow him like a beacon of malevolent intent. Marcus found Benjamin Graves in the last place he expected, not hiding behind lawyers and legal documents, but sitting alone in a diner at 3 in the morning, staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The man looked ancient, his face carved with deep lines of guilt and sleepless nights, his hands shaking as he lifted the cup to his lips. The diner was nearly empty except for a tired waitress reading behind the counter and a trucker dozing in a corner booth. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. Marcus slid into the booth across from Graves without invitation, and the old man looked up with eyes that held no surprise, only weary resignation. "You bought the Morrison place," Graves said, his voice rough as sandpaper. "It wasn't a question. I heard about the auction. $7. He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. If I'd known it would go that cheap, I might have bid on it myself. Marcus studied the man across from him. Benjamin Graves was in his 70s, with white hair and skin like old leather. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled, as if he'd been wearing them for days without caring how he looked. There was something broken about him. "You know why I'm here," Marcus said. Graves nodded slowly, his trembling fingers wrapped around the coffee cup like it was an anchor. "The girl told you, didn't she? Valera. She's still there, still waiting." His voice cracked on her name, and Marcus saw tears gathering in the old man's eyes. "God help me. I never meant for any of it to happen the way it did." "But you're the one who told them about the gold," Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice level. "No," Graves said sharply, his head snapping up with surprising vigor. "That's not how it happened." He leaned forward across the scarred table, his eyes burning with the need to be understood. "I love that family, boy. I loved them like they were my own blood. And I loved Valera most of all." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd expected denials, excuses, maybe even threats. But not this raw confession of love from a man who looked like he'd been dying slowly for decades. "James Morrison was my best friend," Graves continued, his voice gaining strength as the story poured out of him. "We grew up together, served in Korea together. When he found that gold vein under his ranch, I was the first person he told. He trusted me with his family's future." Marcus watched the old man's face, looking for signs of deception, but all he saw was pain so deep it seemed to have carved permanent channels in his features. "I was going to marry her," Graves whispered, his voice breaking completely now. "Valera and we'd been planning our wedding for months. She was 19, beautiful as an angel, and for some reason she loved a roughneck like me. We were going to use the gold money to buy our own place, start a family." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and for a moment Marcus thought he caught a glimpse of movement in the diner's front window. A flash of white dress, a shimmer of dark hair. But when he looked directly, there was nothing there. Graves pulled a worn leather wallet from his jacket pocket and extracted a photograph that had been folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn white. He placed it on the table between them with the reverence of a man handling a religious relic. The photo showed a younger version of Graves standing beside Valera in front of the ranch house. They were both smiling, his arm around her waist, her head tilted against his shoulder. "I needed help getting the gold properly appraised," Graves said, his fingers hovering over the photograph. "James didn't know anything about mining or precious metals. Neither did I, really. But I knew people who did. Men who worked the bigger mines up north." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as the pieces began falling into place. "You brought outsiders into it." "3 of them." Graves nodded miserably. "Cole, Harrison, and Webb. They called themselves mining consultants, but they were really just thieves with fancy certificates. I thought I was being careful, thought I was protecting James by bringing in experts. Instead, I was signing his family's death warrant." The coffee cup slipped from Graves' shaking hands and shattered on the floor, sending dark liquid splashing across the faded linoleum. The waitress looked up with mild annoyance, but neither man moved to clean up the mess. "They came to evaluate the mine on a Tuesday," Graves continued, staring down at the broken ceramic. "I took them down into the tunnels, showed them the gold veins, let them see how much wealth was hidden under that ranch. Their eyes lit up like Christmas morning, and I knew I'd made a terrible mistake." "Why didn't you warn the Morrisons?" Marcus asked. "I tried," Graves said, his voice barely audible now. "I went to the ranch that very night to tell James what I'd seen in those men's faces. But when I got there," he closed his eyes, and Marcus could see his whole body trembling. "The house was dark, too quiet. I knew something was wrong before I even got out of my truck. I found James first, in the kitchen," Graves whispered. "Shot in the back of the head while he was washing dishes. Margaret was in the living room, and the boys were in their beds upstairs. All of them dead. All of them murdered while I was probably at home having dinner and thinking about my wedding plans." "And Valera?" Graves' eyes snapped open, and Marcus saw something in them that was worse than grief, worse than guilt. "I never found her body," he said. "I searched that house from top to bottom, searched the barn, searched every inch of the property. The killers had taken everything of value, emptied out the mine. But Valera was just gone. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. You think she escaped? For 45 years, I told myself that's what happened, Graves said. I told myself she got away somehow. I used every connection I had, spent every dollar I could spare hiring private investigators to look for her. I never married, never had children, never built the life I'd planned because I was waiting for her to come home. But she never did. Graves shook his head slowly. 3 months ago, I got a call from the county courthouse. They were finally releasing the Morrison property from legal limbo, putting it up for auction. I was going to tear the whole place down, Graves said, his voice gaining intensity. Burn the house, fill in the mine, salt the earth if I had to. I thought maybe if I destroyed every trace of what had happened there, Valara's spirit could finally find peace. The old man looked up at Marcus with eyes that held desperate hope. But then you bought it for $7, and I knew the truth I'd been running from for 45 years. She never escaped, did she? She's still there, still trapped in that house where her family died, still waiting for someone to save her. The drive back to the Morrison ranch felt like a funeral procession. Benjamin Graves sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's Honda, staring out at the dark prairie with eyes that seemed to be seeing memories from decades past. As they pulled away from the diner, Marcus caught a glimpse of Valera in the rearview mirror, standing on the sidewalk in her white dress, watching them leave with an expression he couldn't read. She looked exactly the same, Graves whispered, his voice barely audible. 19 years old, beautiful as the day I fell in love with her. How is that possible? Marcus didn't have an answer. The rules of the supernatural world he'd stumbled into seemed to operate on logic that had nothing to do with science or reason. Love and loss and unfinished business created their own physics here. As they drove through the darkness, Graves began talking in a stream of consciousness that sounded like a man confessing his sins. I was 23 when I met her, he said, his gnarled fingers tracing patterns on the foggy passenger window. Fresh back from Korea, trying to figure out what to do with a life that suddenly felt borrowed. Her father James hired me to help with the ranch work, and the first time I saw Valera hanging laundry on the line behind the house, I knew I was looking at my future. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating patches of prairie grass that swayed in the wind. In the distance, Marcus could see the faint glow that marked the Morrison ranch. She was shy at first, Graves continued, lost in memories that seemed more real to him than the present moment. Wouldn't say more than hello when I'd tip my hat to her. But James invited me to Sunday dinners, and slowly she started warming up to me. Started smiling when she'd catch me looking at her across the dinner table. Marcus found himself drawn into the old man's story despite the fear gnawing at his stomach. There was something beautiful about the way Graves talked about Valera, something that transformed his weathered face. Our first kiss was in the barn during a thunderstorm, Graves said, and for the first time since Marcus had met him, the old man actually smiled. She'd gone out to check on the horses when the lightning started, and I followed to make sure she was safe. We got caught in there when the rain started coming down in sheets, just the two of us and the smell of hay and the sound of thunder rolling across the sky. The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. I should have married her sooner. Should have taken her away from that ranch the moment her father told me about the gold. But I was young and stupid and thought I could protect her by staying close. The ranch house came into view ahead, and Marcus felt his heart sink. The building was dark now, no sign of the cold blue glow he'd seen when he'd fled hours earlier. But somehow that was worse. The darkness felt expectant, hungry, like a predator waiting for prey to walk into its trap. They're still in there, Marcus said as he parked the Honda. The killers, I mean. Cole, Harrison, and Webb. Valera says they're bound to the place where they committed murder, just like she is. Graves reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made Marcus's eyes widen. An old Colt .45 revolver, its metal worn smooth by decades of handling. I've been carrying this gun for 45 years, he said, checking the cylinder with practiced movements. Bought it the day after I found the bodies, thinking I'd hunt down those bastards and make them pay for what they did. You think bullets will work against supernatural killers? These aren't ordinary bullets, Graves said, showing Marcus the cartridges in the cylinder. Each one had been carved with symbols that looked like a cross between religious iconography and something much older. Had them blessed by every priest, rabbi, and medicine man I could find. If there's any justice in this world or the next, these will send those murderers straight to hell where they belong. They got out of the car and approached the ranch house together. The front door stood open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. But as they climbed the porch steps, Marcus caught the scent he'd grown to associate with Valera. Vanilla and rain on grass, and something indefinably sad. "She's here," Graves whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "After all these years, she's finally here." They entered the house, and Marcus was surprised to find it exactly as he'd left it. No signs of supernatural destruction, no evidence that the place had been torn apart by vengeful spirits. The blood stain in the kitchen was still there, dark and permanent on the pale wood. But it was in the living room that they found her. Valera stood in front of the stone fireplace, her white dress gleaming like moonlight in the darkness. She looked solid now, more real than she had since Marcus first met her, as if being in the presence of the man she'd loved was giving her strength. "Benjamin," she said, and her voice carried all the weight of 4.5 decades of separation and longing. "You came back." Graves dropped the gun and crossed the room in 3 quick strides, reaching out to touch her face with trembling fingers. This time, unlike in the barn, his hand didn't pass through her. She was solid, warm, real under his touch. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "God, Valera, I'm so sorry. I brought them here. I led them to your family. This is all my fault." "No," she said softly, covering his hand with her own. "You couldn't have known what they were planning. You were trying to help us, trying to build a future for us. The blame belongs to them, not to you." Marcus watched their reunion with a mixture of joy and growing dread. Something felt wrong about this moment, too perfect, too easy. Where were the supernatural killers who had been hunting through the house just hours before? "We need to get you away from here," Graves was saying, his hands moving over Valara's face and hair as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I have money, connections. We can go anywhere you want. Start over somewhere safe." "I can't leave," Valera said, and Marcus heard something in her voice that made his blood run cold. Not sadness now, but something else. Something that sounded almost like hunger. "I'm bound to this place, bound to the gold that cost my family their lives. And so are you now, Benjamin. So are you." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The windows began to frost over despite the warm summer night outside, and Marcus could see his breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. But it was the change in Valera that terrified him most. Her storm gray eyes had begun to glow with the same cold blue light he'd seen in the mine tunnels. "Valera," Graves said uncertainly, his hands still touching her face, but his voice filled with growing alarm. "What's happening?" She smiled then, and Marcus saw that her teeth had become sharp, predatory. "Nothing's wrong, my love. Everything is finally going exactly as it should. You've come home at last, and now we can be together forever." Behind them, the basement door swung open with a sound like a coffin lid closing. Cold blue light poured up from below, and with it came voices Marcus had heard in the mine. Cole, Harrison, and Webb, the supernatural killers who had been bound to this place by their own greed and violence. Marcus dove for the gun that Graves had dropped, his fingers closing around the cold metal just as the supernatural force in the room reached a crescendo that made the walls themselves pulse with malevolent life. The carved bullets felt warm in the cylinder, as if they were responding to the evil that surrounded them. "Don't," Graves said, his voice breaking as he watched the woman he'd loved for 45 years reveal her true nature. "Please, Marcus. Whatever she's become, I can't watch her die again." Valera laughed, and the sound was like silver bells mixed with breaking glass. "You still don't understand, do you, Benjamin? I never died. I've been here all along, growing stronger, growing hungrier, waiting for you to bring me what I need to finally be free of this place." The cold blue light swirled around her like a living thing, and Marcus could see shapes moving within it. Not just the three killers who had murdered her family, but dozens of others. Men and women and children who had died on this land over generations. All of them bound together by the supernatural force that had grown around the Morrison ranch like a cancer. "What do you need?" Marcus asked, keeping the gun trained on the shifting mass of supernatural energy. Valara's storm-gray eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his soul feel naked. "A choice, Marcus. Join us willingly and live forever in a place where love and loss never have to end. Or fight us and become just another ghost bound to this ranch for eternity." Behind her, the shapes in the cold blue light were becoming clearer. Marcus could see Cole, Harrison, and Webb, their faces twisted by decades of supernatural hunger. But he could also see others. James Morrison and his wife Margaret, their faces filled with the same terrible transformation. The two Morrison boys, no longer children but ageless spirits with eyes like winter storms. "My family chose to join us rather than face true death," Valara continued, her voice carrying the hypnotic quality of a siren's song. "They saw what we could become together, united by the power that flows through the gold beneath this ranch. But they were murdered," Graves said, his voice hollow with understanding. "I saw their bodies." "Bodies die," Valara said simply. "But love is stronger than death, Benjamin. The emotions that tie us to this place are stronger than any physical form." She moved toward him with that same floating grace. "You've been feeding us for 45 years with your grief and your regret. Every sleepless night, every tear you shed has made us stronger." Marcus felt his understanding shift. The supernatural killers weren't separate entities haunting the ranch. They were part of a larger consciousness, a collective spirit that had grown around the gold and the violence and the powerful emotions that had soaked into the very soil. "The gold isn't cursed," he said, the pieces clicking together. "The gold is the heart of it, the source of power that lets you exist between worlds." Valara smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the innocent 19-year-old girl in Benjamin Graves' photograph. "Very good, Marcus. The gold has been absorbing emotional energy for generations. Every death on this land, every moment of love or loss has been stored in those veins of metal beneath our feet. We are what happens when precious metal becomes precious in ways that go far beyond monetary value." The room was growing colder by the minute, and Marcus could see frost forming on the windows and walls. His breath came out in white puffs that seemed to be drawn toward the supernatural entity that had once been the Morrison family. "What happened the night they died?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "The three men came looking for gold," Valara said, her form flickering between the beautiful young woman and something far more terrible. "But they found something much more valuable. They found a family so bound together by love that not even death could separate them." Graves was backing toward the front door now, his face pale as moonlight. "They killed you to steal your family's bond." "They tried," Valara corrected. "But when you love someone as deeply as we loved each other, as deeply as I loved you, Benjamin, death becomes just another threshold to cross. The gold gave us the power to stay together, to exist in the spaces between life and death where emotions are the only currency that matters." Marcus raised the gun higher, his finger tightening on the trigger. "And the killers? Cole and Harrison and Webb. They became part of us the moment they spilled our blood on this land," Valara said. "Their greed and violence gave us strength. Their guilt and fear gave us purpose. They thought they were stealing gold, but instead they became slaves to the very family they had tried to destroy." The cold blue light was expanding now, flowing out of the living room and into the rest of the house like floodwater. Marcus could feel it pulling at him, trying to draw him into the collective consciousness that had claimed so many others. "Join us, Marcus," Valara whispered, and her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You came here looking for a home, for a place to belong. We can give you that. We can give you a family that will never abandon you, love that will never die." For a moment, Marcus wavered. The offer was seductive in ways that went beyond the supernatural. He had been alone for so long, had felt unwanted and unloved for most of his life. The idea of belonging somewhere, of being part of something eternal, called to the deepest needs of his orphaned heart. But then he looked at Benjamin Graves, saw the horror and heartbreak on the old man's face as he watched the woman he'd loved reveal what she had truly become. And Marcus understood that this wasn't love at all. It was obsession, possession, a parasitic force that fed on human emotion and grew stronger with every soul it claimed. "No," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. "This isn't love. This is something that's wearing love's face to hide what it really is." Velara's beautiful features twisted with rage, and suddenly she was no longer beautiful at all. Her storm gray eyes blazed with cold fire. Her skin became translucent enough to show the darkness writhing beneath, and her voice became a chorus of the damned. "Then you choose death," she snarled. "You choose to become our slave rather than our family." The supernatural force in the room exploded outward like a bomb made of malevolent emotion. Marcus felt it slam into him with the weight of decades of accumulated grief and rage, driving him to his knees and making his vision blur with pain. But somehow, through the agony, he managed to keep his grip on the gun. "Benjamin," Marcus shouted over the howling wind that had suddenly filled the living room. "The basement. We have to get to the gold." Graves seemed to understand. Fighting against the supernatural hurricane, he grabbed Marcus's arm and helped him toward the basement door. Behind them, Velara and the collective spirit of the Morrison Ranch gave chase, their voices rising in a cacophony of fury that shook the house to its foundations. The basement stairs felt like a journey through hell itself. The cold blue light was everywhere now, and within it Marcus could see the faces of everyone who had ever been claimed by this place. Dozens of them, all reaching out with grasping fingers and hungry eyes. But at the bottom of the stairs, in the stone room where this nightmare had begun, the candles were still burning, their warm yellow light holding back the cold blue radiance like a fortress of peace. And on the walls, the photographs of the Morrison family showed them as they had been in life. Happy, human, mortal. Together, they plunged into the mine tunnels, racing toward the chamber where veins of precious metal had started a chain of events that had damned an entire family to an existence between worlds. Behind them, the supernatural force that called itself Velara followed with the patience of something that had already waited for decades. The mine chamber had transformed into something that belonged in a nightmare. The gold veins in the walls pulsed with their own light now, not the warm yellow of precious metal, but the same cold blue radiance that had consumed the house above. Each vein throbbed like an exposed artery, and Marcus could swear he heard heartbeats echoing from deep within the stone. The carefully sorted piles of ore were gone, replaced by a single massive formation in the center of the chamber that looked like a tree made of pure gold, its branches reaching toward the stone ceiling. "Jesus Christ," Graves whispered, raising his gun toward the golden tree. "What has it become?" Marcus stared at the formation and felt his sanity stretching. The golden tree was beautiful and terrible at the same time, its surface so perfectly polished it seemed to glow from within. But it was what he could see moving inside the metal that made his blood turn to ice. Shapes that might have been human faces, trapped within the gold like insects in amber, their mouths open in silent screams. It's all of them, Marcus realized. Every soul that's ever been claimed by this place. They're not haunting the ranch, they're part of it. They're part of the gold itself. Behind them, footsteps echoed through the tunnel. The supernatural force that wore Velara's face was coming for them, taking its time because it knew they had nowhere left to run. "There has to be a way to break it," Graves said, circling the golden tree with desperate eyes. But even as he spoke, the temperature in the chamber began to drop. Frost formed on the stone walls, and their breath came out in white clouds that seemed to be drawn toward the golden tree like offerings to some ancient god. The faces within the metal became clearer, more distinct, and Marcus could see James Morrison and his wife Margaret, their features frozen in expressions of infinite sadness. "You cannot destroy us," came Velara's voice from the tunnel behind them, though she had not yet appeared in the chamber. "We are eternal now. bound by bonds stronger than death itself. Marcus examined the carved bullets in his gun, looking at the symbols that Benjamin Graves had said were blessed by holy men of every faith. The markings seemed to pulse with their own faint light, responding to the supernatural energy that filled the chamber. "Benjamin," Marcus said quietly, "when she comes in here, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "I need you to tell her the truth. Not the truth about what happened 45 years ago, but the truth about what's happening right now. Tell her what she's really become." "She thinks this is love," Marcus explained. "She thinks she's preserving her family, keeping them together forever. But look at their faces in the gold. Really look at them. Does that look like happiness to you?" Graves stared at the golden tree, his eyes focusing on the trapped faces within the metal. As Marcus watched, the old man's expression changed from confusion to horror to something deeper and more terrible. "They're suffering," Graves whispered. "God in heaven, they're in agony. They've been trapped like this for 45 years, conscious but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die." "She doesn't see it," Marcus said. "Or she doesn't want to see it. She's so consumed by her need to keep her family together that she's blinded herself to what she's actually done to them." The footsteps stopped at the entrance to the chamber, and Valera appeared in the doorway like a vision from a fever dream. She was beautiful again, her storm gray eyes soft with love and longing, her white dress pristine despite the supernatural chaos. But Marcus could see through the illusion now, could see the hunger and madness that lurked beneath her perfect facade. "My darling Benjamin," she said, floating into the chamber with that same ethereal grace. "Look what we've built together. Look at the family we've created." She gestured toward the golden tree, and Marcus saw her face light up with genuine joy as she looked at the trapped souls of her loved ones. "They're safe now. They can never be hurt again, never be separated again. We can all be together forever, just as we always dreamed." Graves took a step toward her, his weathered face crumpling with grief. "Valera, my love, look at them. Really look at them." "I am looking," she said, confusion flickering across her features. "They're beautiful. They're perfect. They're screaming," Graves said, his voice breaking completely. "Can't you see that they're screaming? You haven't preserved them, darling. You've damned them." For just a moment, the illusion cracked. Marcus saw uncertainty flash across Valara's face, saw her turn toward the golden tree with something that might have been doubt. The cold blue light that surrounded her flickered, and the temperature in the chamber rose slightly. "No," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. "No, they're happy. They chose this. Look at your father's face," Graves pressed, moving closer to her. "Look at your mother's eyes. Look at your brother's. Do they look happy to you?" Valera stared at the golden tree, and Marcus could see her struggling with a truth too terrible to accept. The faces trapped within the metal were becoming clearer, more defined, and their expressions of agony were impossible to deny. "I saved them," Valera whispered, her voice small and lost like a child's. "I kept us all together. I made sure we would never have to be apart." "You imprisoned them," Graves said gently, reaching out to touch her face with fingers that shook with emotion. "You turned their love into chains, their devotion into a cage. This isn't what they would have wanted, darling." The cold blue light surrounding Valera began to flicker more rapidly, and Marcus could see cracks appearing in her perfect facade. Beneath the beautiful 19-year-old girl was something ancient and twisted, something that had been feeding on guilt and obsession for so long it had forgotten what genuine love actually looked like. "But if I let them go," Valera said, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, "I'll be alone. I'll have nothing left but emptiness and silence." "Yes," Graves said simply. "That's what loss means. That's what death means. It's terrible and final and unfair, but it's also natural. It's what allows the living to honor the dead by moving forward, by building new love on the foundation of what came before." Marcus raised his gun, pointing it not at Valera but at the golden tree itself. "There's another choice," he said. "You can let them go, and you can come with us. Back to the world of the living, where love doesn't have to last forever to be real." But even as he spoke, Marcus knew it was impossible. Valera had been dead for 45 years, sustained only by the supernatural force she had created around the gold. If she let go of her family, she would fade away like morning mist. Valera seemed to understand this too. She looked at Marcus with those storm-gray eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw acceptance there instead of desperate hunger. "I can't come with you," she said softly. "I've been dead longer than I was ever alive. But I can give my family the peace they deserve. I can stop making them pay the price for my inability to let go." She turned toward the golden tree, raising her hands as if in prayer or surrender. The cold blue light that surrounded her began to change, becoming warmer, softer, taking on the golden hue of sunrise instead of the sterile radiance of supernatural power. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the faces trapped within the metal. "I'm so sorry I kept you here so long. I thought I was saving you, but I was only saving myself from having to face the truth." The golden tree began to crack, hairline fractures appearing along its surface as the supernatural bonds that held it together started to weaken. The faces within the metal became more animated, their expressions changing from agony to something that might have been relief. But as the tree cracked wider, Marcus heard voices from deeper in the mine tunnels. The three killers, Cole and Harrison and Webb, drawn by the weakening of the supernatural force that had held them in thrall for decades. "She's freeing them," one of the voices shouted. "Stop her." The three killers burst into the chamber like demons from hell itself, but they were no longer the men who had murdered the Morrison family 45 years ago. Cole, Harrison, and Webb had been transformed by decades of supernatural hunger into something that barely resembled human form. Their faces were stretched and distorted, their fingers had become claws, and their eyes burned with cold blue fire. Marcus didn't hesitate. He raised Benjamin Graves' blessed gun and fired, the carved bullet catching Cole's center mass and sending him staggering backward with a shriek that seemed to shake the entire chamber. Where the bullet struck, golden light poured from the wound like liquid fire, and Cole's supernatural form began to dissolve. "Iron blessed by holy men," Marcus said grimly, turning the gun toward Harrison and Webb. "Turns out faith is stronger than gold after all." But before he could fire again, Harrison launched himself across the chamber with inhuman speed, his claws raking across Marcus's chest and sending him crashing into the stone wall. The gun went spinning away into the shadows. Valera continued her work at the golden tree, her hands pressed against its surface as cracks spread along its length like spiderwebs. The faces trapped within the metal were becoming more animated, and Marcus could swear he heard voices calling out in languages of love and loss and long-delayed gratitude. "Benjamin," Valera called out as Webb circled around toward her. The gun, Graves' dove for the weapon, his 70-year-old body moving with desperate agility as Webb's claws whistled through the air where his head had been moments before. But Harrison was faster, kicking the old man in the ribs and sending him sprawling. Marcus struggled to his feet, blood running down his chest from Harrison's claws. The chamber was filled with golden light now as the tree continued to crack and split, and he could see the trapped souls beginning to stir within the metal. James Morrison's face was the clearest, his eyes opening for the first time in decades to look at his daughter with an expression of infinite love and forgiveness. "Valera," James's voice whispered from within the gold, faint as wind through prairie grass, but unmistakably real. "My beautiful daughter, it's time to let us go." The sound of her father's voice broke something inside Valera. She sobbed as she pressed harder against the golden tree, her supernatural form beginning to flicker as she poured her remaining energy into freeing the souls she had imprisoned. "I love you, Papa," she whispered. "I love all of you so much. I just didn't want to lose you." "You never lost us," came Margaret Morrison's voice, soft as a mother's lullaby. "Love doesn't end with death, sweetheart. It transforms. It becomes memory and gratitude and the strength to help others find their own happiness." Webb reached Valera just as the golden tree split completely in half, releasing a burst of warm light that filled the entire chamber. He raised his claws to strike her down, but Benjamin Graves appeared between them like an avenging angel, the blessed gun in his weathered hands. "Stay away from her," Graves said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. He pulled the trigger, and the blessed bullet caught Webb in the chest, sending him spinning away in a shower of golden sparks. The supernatural killer's form began to dissolve, just as Cole's had. Harrison was the last one standing, and he looked around the chamber with growing desperation as he realized that his immortal existence was about to come to an end. The golden tree had split completely apart now, releasing the souls that had been trapped within its metal embrace. Marcus could see them rising like points of light, finally free to move on to whatever came after life. But as he reached the tunnel, he froze. Blocking his path were the spirits of the Morrison family, no longer trapped in gold, but standing free and radiant in the chamber. James and Margaret, their 2 sons, and finally Valera herself, looking exactly as she had in life, but somehow more real, more present than she'd been since Marcus first met her. "It is over," James Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had faced death with courage and dignity. "You took our lives, but you couldn't take our love. And love is what endures, what conquers, what ultimately wins." Harrison tried to run, but the Morrison spirits surrounded him with arms that were no longer made of flesh, but of something far stronger. Love and forgiveness and the peaceful acceptance of natural law. As they embraced him, Marcus watched the last of the supernatural killers dissolve into points of light that scattered like fireflies. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of dripping water somewhere in the darkness. The golden tree was nothing but ordinary rock and metal now, precious in monetary terms, but no longer supernatural. The cold blue light was gone, replaced by the warm glow of spirits at peace. Valera turned toward Benjamin Graves and Marcus, her form already beginning to fade as the supernatural bonds that had held her to the world finally weakened. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft as a prayer. "Both of you, for helping me see what I had become and for giving me the courage to let go." Graves dropped the gun and moved toward her, his hands reaching out to touch her face one last time. "I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you for 45 years, and I'll love you for whatever time I have left." "I know," Valera smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen. "And I love you too. But love isn't about holding on forever, Benjamin. It's about being grateful for the time we had and using that gratitude to build something good in the world." She was almost transparent now, little more than a shimmer in the air. But her storm-gray eyes were clear and peaceful for the first time since Marcus had met her. "Take care of each other," she whispered, her voice fading like an echo. "Build the life we never got to build. Fall in love, start families, create joy and beauty and all the things that make life worth living. That's how you honor the dead, by living fully in their memory." And then she was gone, dissolved into golden light that rose toward the chamber's ceiling and disappeared into whatever realm awaited souls at peace. The Morrison family was finally together again, but not trapped in gold and suffering. Together in whatever came after life, free to love without pain and remember without regret. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same courthouse where he'd bought the Morrison ranch for $7, watching as a young family signed the papers to purchase the property for its fair market value. The husband was a farmer, the wife was a teacher, and their 2 children were already making plans for the horses they would raise in the barn where so much pain had finally found peace. Benjamin Graves stood beside him, looking 10 years younger than he had that night in the diner. The old man had used his savings to help Marcus start a small construction business, and together they were building homes for families who needed a fresh start. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was good and honest and filled with the kind of love that grows stronger by being shared rather than hoarded. As they left the courthouse together, Marcus caught a glimpse of something in the courthouse window that made his heart skip. A flash of white dress, a shimmer of dark hair, storm-gray eyes that smiled with joy and approval before disappearing like morning mist. Some love stories, he realized, never really end. They just transform into something larger and more beautiful than the people who live them could have ever imagined. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, That transformation becomes the foundation for new love stories to grow and flourish in the light of day. The Morrison Ranch was home to a family again, and Valera Morrison could finally rest in peace, knowing that love had conquered all, even death itself. Like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us that true love never dies. It simply finds new ways to bless the world with hope and healing. Tomorrow, we'll share another tale of love conquering all odds. So make sure you hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. Until then, remember that every ending is just a new beginning in disguise.